I'm 58 years old now, and I've spent the last 3 decades as a forest ranger in the Olympic Mountains of Washington. I've seen bears, cougars, elk, and practically everything that inhabits these ancient forests. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I encountered on a foggy September afternoon in 1995. My name is Thomas Garrett, and this is the story of how a terrifying encounter transformed into the most extraordinary experience of my life, and why I finally decided to share what really happened in that remote forest. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories about unexplainable mysteries and legendary creatures, leave your like on this video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any incredible stories. Your participation in the comments saying what you thought of this story is very important. Let's go. September 1995. I was 29 years old and had been working as a forest ranger in Olympic National Park for only 5 years. It was a job I loved, patrolling trails, helping visitors, monitoring wildlife, maintaining safety in remote areas. That Friday afternoon started like any other. I was doing my usual rounds on the Hoh River Trail, one of the densest and most primitive areas of the park. The forest there is ancient, with trees that are centuries old, trunks covered in vibrant green moss, and a perpetual fog that gives the place an almost mystical atmosphere. It was approximately 3 in the afternoon when I decided to explore an area off the main trail. I had received reports of an unauthorized campsite nearby, and it was my responsibility to investigate. Equipped with my backpack, radio, and bear pepper spray, I entered the dense vegetation. The fog was particularly thick that day, reducing visibility to perhaps 15 meters ahead. The silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional sound of water drops falling from the huge fern leaves. I'd been walking for about 20 minutes when I noticed something strange. The smell. It was a strong, musky odor, like a mixture of wet animal with something I couldn't identify. It wasn't bear. Definitely wasn't elk. It was different, more penetrating, almost suffocating. I stopped, listening carefully, and then I heard it. A low, guttural sound that didn't come from any animal I knew. It wasn't a bear's growl, nor an elk's call, nor a cougar's scream. It was something in between, deep and resonant, that made my stomach turn. Instinctively, I reached for my pepper spray. My training said to make noise, appear large, back away slowly if it was a bear, but my instinct screamed that something was very wrong. And then I saw it. Through the fog, no more than 10 meters away, stood a figure, enormous, massive, covered in dark reddish-brown fur. It must have been at least 2.5 meters tall, with broad shoulders, arms too long to be human, and a head that seemed too small for the immense body. It was standing upright like a man, but it definitely wasn't a man. My brain froze. Every survival instinct I possessed began to scream. It's not possible, I thought. This doesn't exist. This can't be happening. The creature turned its head in my direction. Our eyes met. They were intelligent eyes, not like an animal's, but with something behind them, understanding, awareness. And then it took a step in my direction. I ran. I didn't think, didn't assess the situation, didn't follow my training. I simply turned and ran like I had never run in my life. Branches hit my face. Roots tried to trip me. My backpack bounced heavily on my back. I could hear something behind me, not exactly chasing, but moving. Sounds of breaking branches, of something large navigating through the dense forest. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. My breathing came in irregular gasps. Pure terror ran through my veins. I didn't look back, not once. I just ran until I found the main trail and then continued running until I reached my service vehicle parked at the trailhead. I got in the car, locked the doors with trembling hands, and sat there for 10 whole minutes, just trying to control my breathing and understand what the hell I had just seen. My rational mind tried to find explanations. It had been a standing bear. It had been 2 bears together. It had been a very large man, perhaps a trespasser. It had been the fog creating illusions. But I knew deep down that none of that made sense. I was a trained forest ranger. I knew bears intimately. That wasn't a bear. When I could finally drive, I went straight to the town of Forks, where I lived in a small apartment. It was 6 in the evening when I arrived. My 3 best friends, all from town, had plans to meet at the local bar that night to watch a football game. Marcus worked at the local lumber mill, a big, practical guy who didn't believe in anything he couldn't see or touch. Ray was a mechanic, always skeptical, always looking for the rational explanation for everything. And there was Jennifer, a nurse at the small-town hospital, with her feet firmly planted in reality. They were the only people I really trusted. I arrived at the bar at 7:30, still visibly shaken. They noticed immediately. "Man, you look like you've seen a ghost," Marcus said, laughing as he handed me a beer. I sat with them at our usual table in the corner of the bar, away from the noise of the TV. I took a long sip of the beer, trying to gather courage to tell them what had happened. "You're going to think I've lost my mind," I began. Ray laughed. "What's wrong, Tommy? Did you see Bigfoot?" All three laughed, and I felt my face get hot. It wasn't a joke. I saw something today, something that shouldn't exist. Their laughter diminished when they realized I was serious. Jennifer leaned forward. "Tom, what did you see?" I took a deep breath and told them everything. The fog, the smell, the sound, the enormous creature standing in the forest, the intelligent eyes, my desperate run back to the trail. As I spoke, I could see their expressions changing from concern to skepticism. When I finished, there was a moment of awkward silence. Marcus was the first to speak. "Tom, buddy, you work alone in the forest all day." The fog was thick. "You said that yourself. It was probably just a big bear, and your mind played a trick." "It's bear mating season," Ray added. "They stand on two legs when they're trying to look bigger. You know that." "I know bears," I retorted, my frustration growing. "That wasn't a bear. It had long arms. It was perfectly upright. And the eyes, guys, the eyes were different." Jennifer placed her hand on my arm, gentle but clearly concerned. "Tom, have you been under a lot of stress? Sleeping well? Sometimes our brain can create things when we're tired or anxious. You think I'm making this up?" My voice came out louder than I intended. Some people at nearby tables looked in our direction. "We're not saying that," Marcus said calmly. "We're just saying there's a rational explanation. There always is. Bigfoot isn't real, Tom. They're just stories, legends to scare tourists." "I know what I saw," I insisted, but I could already feel doubt beginning to seep into my certainty. They changed the subject after that, but I could feel the tension. They thought I was exaggerating or tired or simply wrong. I went home early that night, frustrated and confused. In the following days, I couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. My mind kept returning to those few seconds when our eyes met. There had been something there, something that went beyond simple animal curiosity. But maybe my friends were right. Maybe it had just been a bear, and my imagination, superheated by fear, had transformed it into something more. The fog really was thick. I was alone. The human brain is capable of incredible tricks when frightened. Maybe I needed to go back there in broad daylight with a clear head and see that there was nothing extraordinary about that place. I spent the entire weekend thinking about it. Saturday and Sunday were torturous days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that immense figure emerging from the fog. I saw those intelligent eyes watching me. I heard that guttural sound that didn't sound like anything I knew. On Monday, I went back to work trying to maintain normalcy. I did my usual rounds, checking trails, talking with visitors, filling out reports, but my mind was elsewhere. My colleagues noticed I was distracted. "Everything okay, Tom?" My supervisor, a man in his early 50s named Bill, asked during our morning meeting. "You seem kind of out of it." "Just tired," I lied. "I haven't been sleeping very well," Bill frowned. "Do you need a few days off? We don't want anyone in the forest if they're not 100% alert. It's dangerous out there." "I'm fine," I insisted. "I just need a good night's sleep." But I knew I wasn't fine. I knew I couldn't rest until I went back to that place and confirmed, one way or another, what I had really seen. On the following Tuesday, September 19th, I decided to do exactly that. It was my day off, but I drove to the park anyway. It was a clear, sunny day without fog, perfect for dispelling illusions. I parked in the same place and began walking the Ho River Trail. My heart was beating faster than normal, but I told myself it was just residual nervousness. When I reached the point where I had left the main trail, I stopped. I could see my own footprints from the previous week, already half erased by rain and time. "You can do this," I murmured to myself. It's just forest, nothing more. I left the trail again, following approximately the same path. The forest was different under the sun, less threatening, more beautiful. Birds were singing, squirrels ran along tree trunks. Everything seemed perfectly normal. After about 15 minutes, I recognized the area. It was here, that group of enormous cedars, that moss-covered rock. This is where I saw it. I looked around, almost hoping to see nothing, to confirm that it had all been imagination. But then I noticed something. On the ground, near the base of one of the cedars, there were marks. Footprints, not from a bear, not from an elk, not from any animal I knew. They were large, bigger than my boots, with a vaguely human shape, but wider, deeper in the earth. My heart accelerated. I knelt beside one of the marks, comparing it with my own boot. The footprint was at least 45 centimeters long, perhaps 20 wide. The toes were distinct, 5 of them pressed deep into the moist earth. "This isn't bear," I whispered. "Bears leave claw marks, different pads. This is something bipedal, something heavy." A sound behind me made me freeze, a slight crack of a branch, the kind of sound something large makes when moving through the forest. Slowly, very slowly, I turned my head, and there it was again. Closer this time, perhaps only 6 meters away. In the clear light of day, without the fog obscuring it, I could see it perfectly, and it was absolutely real. The creature had dark brown fur that looked well kept, not matted as I imagined it would be. The face was a strange mixture of human and ape, a heavy forehead, wide and flattened nose, but eyes that were unquestionably intelligent. Its arms hung long, its hands were enormous with thick fingers. It must have weighed easily 300 kilos, maybe more. This time I didn't run. Maybe because the sun made everything less terrifying. Maybe because this time I could see that the creature wasn't in an aggressive posture. Its arms were loose at its sides. Its posture was almost hesitant. We stared at each other for long seconds. My forest safety training was useless here. There was no protocol for this. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said in a low voice, keeping my tone calm and non-threatening, exactly as I would with a nervous wild animal. "I don't know if you understand, but I'm not going to hurt you." The creature tilted its head slightly, a gesture so human it left me breathless. Then it did something completely unexpected. It raised one of its enormous hands and pointed, not at me, but deeper into the forest, in the direction opposite the trail. Then it made a sound, not the low grunt I had heard before, but something more urgent, almost pleading. "You want me to go with you?" I asked, incredulous at what was happening. "Is that it? You need to show me something." The creature nodded, a clear and unmistakable movement. It nodded like a human would. "My God," I breathed. "You understand? You really understand?" It pointed again, more insistently this time, and began to move away, moving with surprising grace for something so large. Every few steps, it stopped and looked back, clearly wanting me to follow. All logic said I should leave, call for backup, do anything except follow an unknown creature deeper into the forest. But there was something in the urgency of its movements, in the way it kept looking back, that told me this was important. That I began to think of him as he needed help. "Okay," I said, beginning to follow him. "I'll go with you. But slowly, okay?" He seemed to understand, slowing his pace so I could keep up. We walked for about 15 minutes, deeper into the forest than I had ever been before. The vegetation was dense, the path irregular, but he navigated with ease, occasionally pushing branches aside so I could pass. Finally, we arrived at a small clearing surrounded by enormous Douglas firs, and that's when I saw it. Another creature like him, but smaller, perhaps 2 meters tall, was lying on the ground. It was clearly injured, with improvised bandages made from leaves and moss around one of its legs and torso. Its breathing was shallow and rapid, and I could see it was suffering. The larger creature, the one I had followed, ran to the injured one and knelt at its side, making soft, comforting sounds. Then it looked at me with eyes that were unmistakably pleading. "Your brother," I said quietly, understanding. "He's your brother. and you need help. I approached slowly with my hands raised, non-threateningly. The injured creature saw me and made a weak sound of alarm, trying to move away. The larger one placed a gentle hand on its shoulder, making reassuring sounds. He's telling him I'm safe, I realized. He's telling him to trust me. It's okay, I said calmly, kneeling about a meter away. Let me take a look. I'll try to help. The larger one nodded and gently moved aside, giving me space but staying close enough to intervene if I did something threatening. I approached the injured one, moving with extreme care. Now that I was close, I could see that he needed proper medical treatment. This needs medical treatment, I said to the larger one. Antibiotics, proper bandages, pain medication. I can't do this alone here, but I can stabilize and get supplies. Do you understand? I need to go get help. The larger creature looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. But then he did something that broke my heart. He placed his hand on his own chest, then pointed to the injured brother, and then to me. Then he made a cutting motion across his throat. I understood. He was saying, I trust you, but if you bring others, we die. If people know about us, we're going to die. I won't tell anyone, I promised, and in that moment I made a decision that would change everything. I'll help you both alone, but it will take time. Can you stay with him? Keep him warm and calm. Another nod. I touched my watch. A few hours. I showed with my fingers. 3, 4 hours. I'll be back before dark. He nodded again, and I saw tears in his eyes. Real tears. This impossible being was crying with relief. I ran back to my car faster than I thought possible. My mind was racing. I couldn't go to a hospital or veterinary clinic. They would ask questions. But I had first aid supplies at home, plenty from working in the forest, and I knew the fundamentals of trauma treatment from my training. I drove home, gathered everything I had: gauze, adhesive tape, splints, antibiotics I had from a recent infection, painkillers, clean water, blankets, antiseptic. I filled 2 large backpacks. I stopped, my hand on the doorknob to leave. This was really happening. I was really about to go back there and treat a creature that shouldn't exist, and I couldn't tell anyone, ever. I took a deep breath and went out the door. I returned to the forest, and this time it took me almost 40 minutes to reach the clearing with all the equipment. When I arrived, the larger one was sitting beside his brother, holding his hand. The injured one looked worse, his breathing even more shallow. I worked quickly. First, I cleaned the wounds with clean water and antiseptic. The injured one screamed in pain, and the larger one had to hold him while I worked. Sorry, I repeated several times. I know it hurts, but I need to clean it. I used all my first aid training. I carefully bandaged the injuries, placing sterile gauze and wrapping with bandages that were firm but not too tight. I immobilized the affected area as best I could with the resources I had. I crushed the antibiotic pills and mixed them with water, showing the larger one how to administer them. I did the same with the painkillers. He watched every movement with intense concentration, clearly memorizing everything. When I finally finished, it was already getting dark. The injured one was breathing more easily, the painkillers obviously taking effect. I left extra supplies, all the remaining gauze and antibiotics. I'll come back tomorrow, I told the larger one, to check how he is, okay? He nodded, then did something I'll never forget. He extended his enormous hand, and when I hesitated, he gently took my hand in his. He didn't squeeze, just held it for a moment. A gesture of gratitude, of trust, of connection between 2 species that shouldn't have been able to understand each other. When he released my hand, I placed mine on my own chest. Thomas, I said, pointing to myself. My name is Thomas. He looked at me, then placed his hand on his own chest and made a sound. It was simpler than I expected, something that sounded clearly like Max. I pointed at him. Max. He nodded vigorously, seeming satisfied that I had understood. Then I pointed at the injured brother questioningly. Max made another sound, this one also surprisingly clear. Ben. Thomas, Max, and Ben, I repeated. The 3 of us, friends. Max made that sound I would come to recognize as his version of agreement. Then he gently pushed me in the direction of the trail. He knew I needed to leave before it got completely dark. I came back the next morning before dawn, before there was any chance of crossing paths with other rangers or hikers. Max was waiting at the edge of the clearing, as if he had heard me coming. Ben was awake, his eyes more alert. He looked at me with less fear this time, and when Max made reassuring sounds, Ben nodded slightly at me, a gesture of trust. During the next 2 weeks, I made that walk every day. I changed bandages, checked on the recovery, brought food, berries, fish I caught, even dried meat from my own pantry. Max watched everything, learning. He began changing Ben's bandages himself. He administered the antibiotics without my supervision. He was extraordinarily intelligent and careful, and slowly Ben improved. After 10 days, he could sit up. After 2 weeks, he could stand for short periods with support. He was healing, not completely yet, but much better. And during that time, something incredible happened. We developed a form of communication. It wasn't language exactly, but a system of gestures, sounds, and expressions. Max learned that nodding meant yes, and shaking his head meant no. He learned to point at things he needed. We developed signs for food, water, pain, thank you. One afternoon, after changing Ben's bandages, I sat with them in the clearing. Max was making a soft, almost musical sound, and Ben was responding with similar sounds. "You have language?" I said aloud, amazed. "You communicate with each other, have culture, family, your people." Max looked at me and placed his hand on his chest again, then pointed to the sky through the trees, then to the distant mountains, then to himself and Ben. He was telling me something, about where they came from perhaps, about their species. "I wish I could understand completely," I said. "I wish I could know your story, but maybe it's better this way. If I knew too much, I might be tempted to tell, and I can't do that to you." Max nodded, understanding perfectly what I was saying. His intelligence was simply impressive. He understood not just simple commands, but complex concepts like secret, danger, and trust. I began to wonder how many of them existed in the depths of these forests, living hidden, watching humanity from afar, keeping themselves invisible out of necessity for survival. After 3 weeks, Ben could walk with support. The recovery was progressing well, better than I expected. His physical constitution seemed more resilient than human, capable of healing more quickly. And that meant that soon it would be time for me to stop coming regularly. During those weeks, I learned a lot about Max and Ben. I learned that they were incredibly gentle, despite their formidable strength. Max could easily have hurt me if he wanted, but he always moved carefully around me, conscious of his own power. I learned that they had a sense of humor. Max sometimes hid my equipment as a joke, and when I frantically searched for it, he made a sound that could only be described as laughter. I learned that they felt deep emotions. I saw Max cry when Ben had a particularly difficult night of pain. I saw Ben make gestures of gratitude every morning when I arrived. I saw the two embrace, comfort each other, communicate with an emotional complexity that rivaled any human relationship. One morning, while I was changing Ben's bandages, Max began drawing on the muddy ground with a stick. They weren't random scribble. They were deliberate symbols, figures that clearly represented something. He drew what appeared to be a family, large and small figures together. Then he drew mountains, trees, and what could be caves or shelters. "Your family," I said, pointing to the drawings. "You have more family somewhere." Max nodded, then pointed to the distant mountains to the north. His eyes became sad, and he touched the drawing of the family, then made a gesture I had learned meant far or lost. "You were separated." I understood. "You and Ben got lost from your family." Max nodded again, and I saw the pain in his eyes. It was a story I could only imagine. Perhaps they had wandered too far during a hunt. Perhaps they had fled from something and gotten lost. Perhaps their family was looking for them at this very moment. The idea broke my heart. "Let's get you and Ben strong again," I promised, "and then you can go back to your family." Max looked at me for a long moment, then placed his large hand on my shoulder and squeezed gently. It was a gesture of gratitude so deep that I felt tears in my eyes. That afternoon, as I prepared to leave, something extraordinary happened. Ben, who had remained mostly quiet the entire time I'd known him, made an effort to stand without help. Max immediately moved to support him, but Ben shook his head, determined to do it himself. He stumbled, his muscles clearly still weak, but he managed to stand. Then slowly he took 3 steps in my direction. When he reached where I was, he extended his hand. It was the first time Ben had voluntarily touched me. I placed my hand in his, and he held it firmly but carefully. Then he did something that completely surprised me. He tried to speak. It wasn't the complex sounds of his own language, but a clear attempt to form a human word. "Tomaz," he said, his voice hoarse and uncertain but unmistakable. "Thomas, my name." He had learned my name and was trying to say it. "Yes," I whispered, too emotional to speak louder. "Yes, Ben. I'm Thomas, your friend." Ben nodded, then placed my hand over his own chest, over his heart. Then he placed his hand over my heart. "Friend," he repeated in his own language. A sound I had learned meant exactly that, friend. Max was watching all of this with what I can only describe as pride. Pride in his brother for his courage. Pride in the bond we had formed. He joined us, and the three of us stood there in a circle, hands connected, three beings from two different species, united by impossible circumstances and compassionate choices. That night, when I returned to my house, I sat in my small living room and tried to process everything that had happened in the last 3 weeks. I had indisputable proof that Bigfoot existed, not only existed, but was intelligent, emotional, capable of complex communication and deep social bonds. It was information that could change the scientific world, rewrite biology books, challenge our understanding of human evolution. And I could never tell anyone, because telling would mean exposing Max and Ben. It would mean hunters invading these forests, scientists wanting to capture them for study, the government possibly taking them to secret facilities. It meant destroying their lives, separating them from their family forever, transforming them into specimens instead of people. My friends Marcus, Ray, and Jennifer had called me several times in the past weeks. I had made up excuses not to meet them, saying I was busy with work, that I had caught a cold, anything to avoid having to lie directly to them. But I knew I couldn't avoid them forever. The following Saturday, I finally agreed to meet them for dinner at the same bar where we had met 3 weeks earlier. "Man, we thought you had disappeared," Marcus said when I arrived. "Is everything okay? You look different." "I've just been working a lot," I lied, sitting with them. "You know how it gets this time of year. Lots of tourists, lots of trails to monitor." Jennifer studied me with a nurse's eyes. "Are you sleeping better after that night when you said you saw—" "Well, you know, we were worried." "I'm fine," I assured her. "You guys were right. It was probably just a bear and my imagination working overtime. I spend too much time alone in the forest. Sometimes the mind plays tricks." I saw the relief on their faces. "I'm glad to hear that," Ray said. "You scared us for a moment. We thought you were really believing those crazy Bigfoot stories." I laughed, and the sound came out more fake than I intended. No, I was just tired and the fog created some strange illusions. I'm fine now, but inside my heart ached. I wanted so badly to tell them the truth. I wanted to share the extraordinary experience I had lived, the impossible friendship I had formed, but I couldn't. I could never, because protecting Max and Ben was more important than any need I had for validation or to share this incredible discovery. The following Monday, I returned to the clearing in the morning. I had decided it was time to have a difficult conversation with Max. Ben was significantly better, able to walk without help, moving with more ease. The injuries were almost completely healed, a testament to the incredible recovery capacity of his species. "I can't keep coming here," I explained to Max on a foggy morning at the end of October. "Other rangers will notice, they'll ask questions, and I can't answer without putting you in danger." Max was very quiet, then nodded. He understood. But then he made a series of gestures. He pointed to himself and Ben, then to the distant mountains to the north. They were leaving, deeper into the forest, to where humans rarely went, to try to find their family. "That's good," I said, feeling my chest tighten. "That's best. You need to go back to your family, but I'm going to miss you, both of you." Max placed his hand on my shoulder, a gesture he had seen me make and had adopted. Then he picked up a fallen branch and drew something on the muddy ground. It was a careful drawing of a very specific tree, one that had 3 main trunks growing from a single base. I had seen that tree before, earlier that morning on the walk to the clearing. It was distinctive, impossible to confuse with any other. He pointed to the drawing, then to the moon in the sky still visible in the morning, and showed with his fingers 1. Then he made the circular gesture that meant return. I understood. If I came back to that unique tree every full moon, he would be there. Once a month, we could meet. It was risky, but the risk was manageable. A monthly walk to a specific tree wouldn't raise suspicions. Yes, I said, my voice choked. Yes, I'll go there, I promise. Every full moon, I'll be there. Max nodded, then pulled me into a hug. His arms were enormous and strong, but the hug was gentle. Ben, who had been watching everything, stumbled over to us and hugged me too. For the first time, I heard Ben make complex sounds in his own language, sounds that Max responded to. They were talking, and although I couldn't understand the words, I understood the feeling. Gratitude, farewell, promise of continued friendship. Tomas, Ben said again, my favorite word in his limited English vocabulary. Friend, I responded, hugging them both. You'll always be my friends. Always. Stay safe. Find your family. And if you need me, you know where I'll be. Max placed my hand against the tree with 3 trunks that he had drawn, pressing my palm against the bark. It was a ritual. A promise being sealed. Then they moved away, Ben moving with only a slight limp, Max at his side. Every few steps they turned and waved. I waved back, watching until they completely disappeared into the dense vegetation. I stood there in the clearing for another hour, just absorbing everything. The impossibility of what had happened, the beauty of it, the responsibility I now carried. Finally, I began my walk back, memorizing every detail of the path to the 3-trunk tree. I needed to be able to find it again, in darkness if necessary, in fog, in any condition. The first full moon after our farewell was on October 23rd, 1995. I was nervous when I drove to the park that night. What if Max didn't show up? What if they had decided it was too risky to keep contact? What if something had happened to them? I walked to the 3-trunk tree with only a flashlight, my heart beating hard. The forest at night was a different place, full of sounds and shadows, but I wasn't afraid, not anymore. When I reached the tree, Max was already there. He emerged from the shadows so silently that I almost didn't see him until he was only a few meters away. "Max!" I exclaimed, a huge smile spreading across my face. "You came!" Max made his happy agreement sound and approached. Ben appeared behind him, moving with grace now, completely healed. Both looked well, healthy and strong. We spent 2 hours together that night. I had brought food, things I knew they liked, fruits, nuts, dried meat. They accepted with gratitude, but they had also brought gifts for me. Wild fruits I had never seen before, which they clearly had collected especially for me. They were delicious, sweet and juicy. Max and Ben told me, through gestures and drawings in the earth, about their journey deeper into the forest. They still hadn't found their family, but they had found signs, footprints, marks on trees, evidence that others of their species were nearby. They were optimistic, and seeing that hope in their eyes filled me with joy. This became our routine. Every month on the full moon, I made the walk to the 3-trunk tree, and every month Max and Ben were there. Sometimes only Max appeared, and through gestures he told me that Ben was resting or hunting, but most times both came. We shared food, communicated through our increasingly sophisticated system of gestures and sounds, and simply enjoyed each other's company. In December 1995, during our full moon meeting, Max seemed particularly excited. He took me farther from the 3-trunk tree and showed me something extraordinary. Footprints. Not his or Ben's, but from others. Smaller footprints, probably from females or young ones, and even larger footprints than Max's. An entire family had passed through that area recently. "Your family," I said, excited for him. "You found your family." Max nodded vigorously, his eyes shining with joy. He made gestures showing that he had seen members of his family at a distance. They hadn't reunited yet. Max was being cautious, making sure it was safe, but he knew where they were now. In the following weeks, I continued my normal life. I worked as a forest ranger, did my rounds, interacted with tourists and colleagues. No one suspected I had an extraordinary secret. No one knew that once a month I met with creatures that the entire world believed were just legends. My friends Marcus, Ray, and Jennifer noticed I seemed happier, more at peace. "You're different lately," Jennifer commented during a dinner in January 1996. "In a good way. Lighter. What changed?" "I guess I'm finally adjusting to the job." I lied partially. "And I've been spending a lot of time in nature lately. It's therapeutic." She smiled. "Well, keep doing what you're doing. It's working. If she knew, if any of them knew that my therapy involved monthly meetings with two creatures that shouldn't exist, creatures that had become some of the closest friends I'd ever had. But that was a secret I would take to my grave, if necessary. In February 1996, Max brought even better news. He had finally reunited with his family. Through elaborate gestures, he told me how the reunion had been. There had been calls across the forest, recognition, then embraces and celebration. Ben and he were back with their group, back where they belong. "I'm so happy for you," I said, genuinely moved. "But does this mean you won't be able to come to our meetings anymore?" Max shook his head vigorously. No, he would make sure to come. Our meetings were important to him, and he trusted me. Ben appeared from the shadows at that moment, accompanied by another figure. It was a female, smaller than Max, but still impressively large, with lighter fur and gentle eyes. Max made introductory gestures. Through sounds and signs, I understood that she was Ben's mate, his partner. She watched me cautiously, but when Ben placed his hand on my shoulder and said my favorite word, Thomas, fry end, she relaxed. Ben was telling her that I was safe, that I was family. Slowly, I extended my hand in greeting. She hesitated, then placed her hand in mine. Her hands were smaller than Max's, more delicate, but still incredibly strong. "Hello," I said softly. "It's an honor to meet you." She made a soft sound, almost musical, and Ben translated with gestures. Her name, in their language, was something I couldn't pronounce, but Ben drew a flower in the earth. I understood. She was Flower, or at least that's how I would come to think of her. During the following months, our full moon meetings became even more special. Sometimes it was just Max, sometimes Max and Ben, sometimes up to 3 or 4 members of their family came. Never the whole group, that would be too risky, but enough that I began to know their family dynamics, their individual personalities. There was an elder, an enormous male with almost completely grey fur, who Max indicated was the leader of his group. He watched me with wise and ancient eyes, eyes that had seen decades of changes in these forests. There were young ones, curious and playful, who reminded me of human children in their energy and joy, and there were other adults, each with their own distinct personality. I learned that their society was complex, with hierarchies based on age and experience, with defined but flexible roles. The older males, like the elder, were protectors and decision-makers. The females were often the healers and educators of the young. The younger adults were hunters and gatherers. But everyone took care of each other. Everyone contributed to the group's well-being. I also learned about their fears of humans, mainly. Max told me, through gestures and facial expressions, stories of encounters with hunters, stories of members of their species being shot, injured, chased, stories that explained why they lived so hidden, so cautious, avoiding human contact at all costs. "You're safe with me," I promised all of them repeatedly. "I'll never tell anyone about you. I'll never betray you. You have my word, my life if necessary." And they believed me. Slowly, over months, their caution transformed into genuine trust, not just with Max and Ben, but with the entire family. I became, in a strange and wonderful way, part of their extended circle. The years passed, and our full moon meetings continued. 1996 became 1997, then 1998. Each meeting was precious, each shared moment a gift. I saw Ben and Flower have a baby in 1997, an adorable little one that Ben proudly introduced to me when it was only a few months old. I saw the elder age, his movements becoming slower, his posture more stooped. In my work, I continued being just Thomas Garrett, the quiet and dedicated forest ranger. I was good at my job, perhaps even exceptional, because I knew these forests in a way no one else did. I knew where not to go, which areas were Max and his family's territory, where humans shouldn't disturb. Subtly, I began directing visitors away from those areas. I suggested alternative trails, created plausible reasons to close certain paths. Concerning erosion, bear activity, unstable trees, my supervisor, Bill, sometimes questioned my decisions, but I always had ready justifications. He trusted my judgment, and so the areas where Max's family lived remained relatively undisturbed. In 1999, something significant happened. A group of Bigfoot researchers came to the park, equipped with cameras, audio recorders, and all sorts of tracking equipment. They had official permits. There was nothing I could do to keep them out, but I could guide them in the wrong direction. I offered my services as a local guide, claiming knowledge of the areas where sightings had been reported. Then I systematically led them to every corner of the park, except the places where I knew Max's family might be. We spent 2 weeks walking through forests, examining areas, finding exactly nothing. The researchers were disappointed, but grateful for my help. "Have you ever seen anything unusual around here?" the team leader asked me on our last day. "Any sign that these creatures might really exist?" I looked at him and lied straight to his face. "In 15 years working in these forests, I've never seen anything that couldn't be explained by known animals or natural phenomena. If Bigfoot is here, he's extraordinarily good at hiding," he sighed. "Well, it was good to be sure. Thanks for your help, Thomas. You know these mountains better than anyone." If he knew that I had spent the previous night with Max, laughing at the fact that a dozen humans equipped with modern technology had passed within 2 kilometers of where the family was and hadn't detected anything. Max found it hilarious and showed me how his family had watched the researchers from hidden positions, always one step ahead, always invisible. I continued my double life year after year, full moon after full moon. In 2005, I was 40 years old and had spent an entire decade keeping the most extraordinary secret in the world. Max was middle-aged now, his fur beginning to show grey strands. Ben was a devoted father, with 2 babies now. Flower was a constant and reassuring presence at our meetings. But in 2006, tragedy struck. The elder, the wise leader of Max's group, died. Max told me during our February meeting, and I could see the deep pain in his eyes. Through gestures, he described how they had held something like a funeral, how the family had gathered around the body, making sounds of mourning, touching the elder one last time, before letting him return to the forest. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice choked. "I know he was important to all of you." Max nodded, tears running down his fur-covered face. It was a powerful reminder that these creatures experienced loss and grief as deeply as any human. I brought wildflowers at the next full moon meeting and arranged them specially near our 3-trunked tree. "For the elder," I said, "to honor his memory." Max and Ben watched me do this, then did the same, collecting flowers and leaves to add to the improvised memorial. It was a moment of shared mourning, 2 species honoring the passing of a great leader. The 2000s brought additional challenges. Technology was advancing rapidly. Google Earth meant that remote areas could be seen from space. Trail cameras became common, placed by wildlife researchers and hunters. Cell phones with cameras meant that every tourist was a potential photographer. I talked with Max about these challenges. He understood more than I expected. His family had noticed the trail cameras and learned to avoid them. They had become even more cautious, even more vigilant. Modernity was shrinking their world, but they were adapting, as they always had. In 2010, at 45 years old, I began thinking seriously about retirement. Not immediately, but eventually. And that raised an important question. What would happen to my promise to Max when I was no longer a forest ranger? When I no longer had easy access to these remote areas? I talked with Max about this. Through elaborate gestures, we managed to communicate the concept of aging, of life changes, of potential changes in our meeting. Max thought for a long moment, then drew something in the earth. It was a path leading deeper into the forest, beyond where tourists went, beyond where even forest rangers normally patrolled. He was showing me an alternative meeting place, one I could reach even as a civilian, without my uniform and forest ranger authority. It was farther, more difficult to reach, but it was possible. I memorized every detail of the map he drew. The years continued to pass, our friendship deepening with each full moon. In 2015, I was 50 years old. Max was in his 60s, and Ben in his 50s. We were all middle-aged men now, our conversations having a different quality. There was wisdom in them, reflection on lives lived, on choices made. One night, under a particularly bright moon, I sat with Max in comfortable silence. "You know," I finally said, "that meeting you and your family is the most important thing that's ever happened to me. More important than my job, more important than anything else. You've taught me that there's more mystery and wonder in the world than I ever imagined." Max looked at me with those wise and ancient eyes, then placed his hand over my heart. He made a soft sound, and although it wasn't a word I could translate, I knew what it meant. Brother, friend, family. Yes, I agreed. Family. Not by blood, but by choice, by trust. By decades of monthly meetings and shared secrets, I retired in 2022, after 32 years as a forest ranger. My retirement party was small but warm. Bill, who had retired years before, showed up. Marcus, Ray, and Jennifer were there. Current and former colleagues gathered to wish me well. "You served these forests well, Thomas," the current park supervisor said in a brief speech. "Your dedication to preserving these wild lands has been exemplary." If any of them knew that my dedication included protecting an entire family of beings that no one believed existed, but that would remain my secret, carried with pride and love. Now, at 58 years old, I continued making the walk every full moon. It's harder now. My knees aren't what they used to be, but I persist. I use the new meeting location that Max showed me years ago, deeper in the forest, more difficult to reach, but still possible for a determined man. Max is in his early 70s now, I estimate. His fur is largely grey, his movements slower. Ben is in his early 60s, still strong but clearly aging. Ben's babies are adults now, with families of their own. The family has grown, generations overlapping, a continuous lineage surviving against all odds in these ancient mountains. Sometimes I wonder what will happen when I can no longer make the walk, when my legs finally give out, when the journey becomes impossible. I talked with Max about this recently. He understands. Through gestures, he told me that when that time comes, our friendship won't end. It will simply change form. The memories will remain, the bond will remain, even if the physical meetings have to stop. But for now, I continue walking. I continue keeping my promise made 27 years ago to a creature who needed help and trusted a human stranger enough to ask. That trust created something extraordinary, a bridge between two species, a friendship that defies all expectations and odds. And so I share this story now, not as proof, not as scientific claim, but simply as my truth, as testimony that there's more in this world than our books and theories acknowledge, that there's intelligence and consciousness in forms we don't yet fully understand, and that sometimes the greatest gifts come from keeping secrets, from protecting what is precious, from choosing compassion instead of curiosity. Max, Ben, Flower, and their entire family are still out there, living their lives in the depths of the Olympic Mountains. They raise their children, bury their dead, celebrate their joys, and face their sorrows. They are people as completely as you or I, just different in form. And I, Thomas Garrett, retired forest ranger, carry their secret with honor. I carry the memories of decades, of full moons, of impossible encounters, of friendship beyond species barriers. I carry the responsibility to protect them as long as I live, to ensure their world remains safe and undisturbed, because some wonders aren't meant to be exposed. Some discoveries aren't meant to be shared with the entire world. Some friendships are too sacred to be proven or quantified. And some stories are true, regardless of whether anyone believes them or not. This is my story, the story of how I found Bigfoot, not once but hundreds of times over nearly 3 decades. The story of how fear transformed into friendship, how distrust transformed into trust, and how an ordinary forest ranger became guardian of nature's most extraordinary secret. And if you ever find yourself walking in the depths of the Olympic Mountains on a full moon night and feel like you're being watched, don't be afraid. It might just be Max and his family, watching from afar, protecting their territory, living their lives in peace. And if you're wise, you'll respect their privacy, continue on your way, and keep their secret too. Because that's what we do for the things we love. We protect, we respect, and we let some mysteries remain mysteries, some wonders remain untouched, and some friends remain safely hidden in the ancient forests where they belong. And you, what would you do if you encountered something like this in the forest? Would you tell everyone, or keep the secret? Leave your opinion in the comments. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories like this. Until next time.